currently India is witnessing a historic movement or struggle by farmers, and this certainly has been an unprecedented set of incidents in India. Such a struggle was probably last seen in the 1980s when the Boat Club of Delhi was filled with farmers and so on. So in that sense, it's a very important development, and there is something that has united the farming community in a very important way, despite the different heterogeneities that exist in the organization of this community in itself. So the single demand of the movement has been that the 3 Farm Acts passed by the Parliament should be repealed. And on its part, the government has come out with a set of claims and arguments which lists out a series of claims with regard to how farmers would benefit from these 3 legislations. And there are counter arguments to that as well. So my presentation today is about explaining what the Farm Acts are about and how credible are these claims and counter arguments put out by 2 sides that are involved in the agitation. I shall use some slides during my presentation. I think some points would be better put out through these slides, and I think I will stick to about 45 to 50 minutes, at max 55 minutes, and after that we can have a discussion, and that's what I'm looking forward to. Much of what I'm saying is probably already in the public domain in one way or the other. So this the 3 Farm Acts that we are discussing cannot be discussed in isolation, in an abstract sense, because the institution of these public institutions that we are talking about with regard to these Farm Acts have a long history of their establishment and development in India. In fact, if you look at the history of farm interventions in India, and particularly the Green Revolution after the 1960s, it is important to understand that the Green Revolution was not purely a technological package alone in India. Green Revolution was ably complemented by a series of public institutional interventions by the government. And these public institutional interventions had an enormous role to play in the dissemination of the Green Revolution technology to ensure that more and more farmers adopted these new technologies, invested in these new technologies, were incentivized to adopt these technologies, and so on. So these public institutional investments and interventions played a very important role in how Green Revolution played out after the 1960s. There are a series of interventions that were introduced from the 1960s onwards. They included interventions with respect to price policy, with respect to input subsidy policy, with respect to credit policy, nationalization of banks in 1969, for example, marketing policies, agricultural research, large number of agricultural universities and agricultural extension, for example, the large number of village extension officers and so on that existed in different states and so on. So different sets of interventions were introduced in different spheres, as you can see. All this was in addition to the technological intervention with respect to the spread of high-yielding varieties of seeds of rice and wheat. Now, while all these are important, I shall, for the purpose of today's discussion, pick out just 2 of these and subject them to a detailed description in the following 2-3 minutes, because that's what is the context for the discussions that are happening today. Now, the first is price policy. Now, it was very clearly understood from the 60s onwards that if you have to ensure that farmers adopt these new technologies, which are expensive, of course, which needs some amount of investment by the on the side of the farmer, you will have to ensure the farmer a stable price. Now, this stable price has to be, as the Ford Foundation report of 1959 had already suggested, in the midst of India's food crisis, and the report is titled "India's Food Crisis and How to Meet It." And that report famously said that there should be two things. One, there should be a assured basic minimum price given to the farmer. And that's the principle upon which these interventions in price policy were built. So in 1965, you had the establishment of the Food Corporation of India, and you also had the establishment of the Agricultural Prices Commission, which later came to be known as the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. So these the role of this price policy here through these support price and procurement price systems, which would be declared by the Agricultural Prices Commission at that time, was combined with the intervention related to the public distribution system at the consumer level to create what is called an integrated national food policy. So here is a national food policy which tried to cater to the interests of both the producer on the one hand and the consumer at the other hand. The producer wants a higher price. The consumer wants food at an affordable price. And these are probably contradictory objectives. One person wants higher price, the other person wants lower price. So how do you meet these both these objectives at the same time? And that's how the national food policy links the farmer and the consumer through a detailed institution of a supply chain, which includes the Food Corporation of India, which would go to the surplus regions. And these and the very existence of surplus regions itself was a product of the Green Revolution itself, because Green Revolution was typically a policy that betted on the best. So as a result, you had this infusion of technology into areas which are ready for a quick response to such intervention. So you look for areas with good irrigation, you look for areas with some amount of presence of farmers with some capital with them. So all these took the country to states like Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, and so on. So it is from these areas of India that about 2/3 of the additional production of Green Revolution came from, and the rest were deficit regions. So you needed a mechanism to support farmers with a stable price. Also, you needed a mechanism to transport these surplus food grains from the surplus regions and distribute it to the deficit regions. That's where the PDS, or the public distribution system, became very important. So from the farmer, you would procure at the minimum support price, and this minimum support price would be given, and the grain would be procured by the Food Corporation of India. The Food Corporation of India would pass it on to the state governments. The state governments would pass it on to the fair price shops, and from where it will be distributed to the beneficiaries. So this whole chain was built from the 1960s onwards, connecting the farmer in the surplus region and the consumer in the deficit regions of India. And this meant that whatever costs were incurred by the government between procuring from the farmer at the minimum support price and transporting them right up to the state level into the hands of the beneficiary here, these costs would be met as part of the budgetary outgo of the central government in the form of a food subsidy. So every year the government would put out a food subsidy, and that would be used to pay for this supply chain. Now, this was the new system. So procurement price basically became an important price, with using which the government was procuring from the surplus regions and distributing to the poor in the deficit regions. On the other hand, the support price was a support system whereby the government basically fixed a floor price, and whoever faced a market price below this floor price is free to come to the government, and the government is promising them that I will pick up whatever you bring to me in case the market price falls below the floor that I have set. So this was a promise given to the farmer in the form of a floor minimum price. So both these together, both the procurement price on the one hand and the support price on the other, and the institutional mechanism that took grains from the surplus regions through the FCI, through the state civil supplies corporations, right up to the PDS at the village level. This formed a part of a support system built in terms of price policy for the farmers. And this was a very important intervention put together in the 1960s. And this is with regard to the price policy. Now, Coming to the marketing policy, if you look at the marketing system that existed in rural areas prior to the 1960s, you would see that the rural marketing system was dominated by the presence of village traders, small village traders, and the farmer largely sold in the village itself to the village trader. And this village trader, there was enormous exploitation of the farmer on the hands of these village traders. These village traders never gave a good price to the farmer. They forged the weights and measures they used in procuring commodities from the farmers. They never gave the farmer adequate information about how the markets were behaving. So basically the farmer was consistently deprived of a remunerative price and also a stable market prior to the 1960s. The price policy of the government took care of it to some extent, but it did not handle the whole problem. Much more needed to be done, and that's how the idea of state level APMC Acts, Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee Acts, are thought of from the 1960s onwards. Some of these acts existed prior to 1960s also, but they were more in only some states, some pockets, and so on. So as part of these state level APMC Acts, you had the establishment of regulated markets or mandis, which were to act as farmers' markets, largely in the wholesale sense of the word. So what were these regulated markets supposed to do? They were supposed to provide with the farmer a better price discovery mechanism. That is, when the farmer goes into the APMC mandi, you will see that the price is very clearly, transparently displayed for everyone. And on top of it, you could actually use different methods of sale, like, for example, auction method and so on, to get a better price on top of it. The weights and measures would be standardized in each of these mandis. There will also be facilities for grading and storage in these mandis, where, for example, if the farmer sees that today the price is low and maybe tomorrow the price will go up, the farmer could actually use avail of a guest house facility in the APMC mandi, where he could stay till tomorrow and then sell it at a better price tomorrow. So these were the different kinds of facilities that became available to the farmer in the form of a regulated, stable market system after 1965. And this also enormously helped the farmers in the period after 1965. So basically what came into existence was, if you have the farmer here, the farmer would actually sell it to the APMC mandi, and from the APMC mandi it will go via traders to the secondary APMC markets, and from there it will go to the local markets. This was the kind of chain that was built as part of the APMC mandis. This does not mean that the farmer was always selling to the mandi. The farmer sometimes sold to the trader also many times, and this also ultimately ended up entering the mandi. And here the trader played a very important role of an aggregator also. I'll come to that in a while, but broadly this is what existed. And in certain rare cases, the farmer could also directly sell to the secondary APMC mandi. But this what you see here is the most important line of supply that emerged after the establishment of the APMC mandis. So here the commission agent, who is called CA here, played a very important role. He would intermediate between the farmer and the trader in the primary APMC market, and another commission agent would actually intermediate between the trader in the primary APMC market and the trader in the secondary APMC market. So this was a very elaborate mechanism which was set up to ensure that the producers, small and marginal producers who are fragmented in the countryside, are brought in touch with the trading community in a wholesale sense of the word, are connected with larger markets, and the benefits of that will accrue to the farmer in the form of a better price. So this was a very important system that was created with the mandis in the 1960s. So price policy and marketing policy, very important interventions. Now come the 1990s and the liberalization agenda of the 1990s, what happens is this line of thought, this line of argument in agricultural marketing was questioned by organizations like the World Bank, many economists who professed a certain kind of free market ideology, and so on. So basically, what you see here is that with the liberalization of agriculture after 91, the two points that we mentioned till now, the price policy and the marketing policy, both came under criticism and attack from these sections. What was the criticism with respect to price policy? First, the point being made was that the food subsidy, which is an outgo from the budget of the government, which meets the cost between procurement and distribution, is actually a fiscal burden on the government. And given the larger emphasis on austerity policies with regard to the budget formulation, the food subsidy as a fiscal burden, the argument or the narrative of food subsidy as a fiscal burden got enormous currency in the media, business press, etc. And the argument was that this expenditure should be brought down. The argument was also that the government is an inefficient player in the food market, and it is not an efficient mover of commodities from the surplus deficit regions. This role is best played by private players, private traders, etc. And as a result, the government should vacate the field of procurement, distribution, etc. to private players, and if possible, larger private players in the corporate sector. That would be much more efficient a way of transporting commodities. The argument was also made, and this is very important, that administered prices like support price and procurement price actually, rather than being farmer friendly, are actually run counter to the welfare of farmers. It was argued that they depress the prices received by farmers because you have fixed a support price and more importantly a procurement price, which sometimes can be below the market price. Also, what happens is the farmer is deprived of many other higher prices. For example, he could have exported it and got a higher export price, which prevails in the international market. You are depriving the farmer of that higher export price. Sometimes the domestic market prices also rule higher than the procurement price, and in such cases also you deprive the farmer of a higher price in the domestic market as well. So the best way to get the prices right, to give the farmer a better price, would be to downscale procurement, downscale the institution and implementation of the minimum support price system, and allow the farmer to push the commodity into the open market through private traders rather than through the government, which will mean that the farmer will get a higher price in the domestic market or the export market rather than the procurement price that he or she is getting at the mandi level at this point of time, as existed at that time. So because of these 3 points, the recommendations were put forward that India should basically minimize procurement, and it should procure only to maintain a minimum buffer stock and not more than that. And only for that purpose should the idea of or the concept of MSPs be used, and nothing more than that. So if you minimize procurement, what would you left with to give at the PDS level for distribution? That also would come down. So you should proportionately downscale PDS also. That is how the idea of converting PDS from a universal PDS to a targeted PDS, dividing the population into APL and BPL and giving subsidized food only to the BPL population. That point comes about as part of this larger argument. So minimize procurement and downscale PDS into a targeted system, and let private markets take over, let futures trading take over, and let the government withdraw. This is the larger point that was made with the coming of the liberalization after 1991 with regard to price policy. Second is with regard to marketing policy, which is the second aspect that we emphasized after the 1960s. Now, with regard to marketing, the argument was that India for a long time has been stuck with a rice wheat centered cropping pattern, and India needs to diversify its cropping pattern to what? To fruits, to vegetables, to flowers, etc., which are high value, which are export oriented, which are more capital intensive. And this diversification needs to take place in Indian agriculture, and only then can we ensure a better price for Indian farmers. India has to follow the principles of comparative advantage. If food security is a concern, then we can always earn foreign exchange through the export of flowers, fruits, vegetables, etc., and import as much of food grains as we want from the international market. And we also have the WTO from 1994, so that wouldn't be a problem. And these were the arguments that were put forward. No, so India needs to diversify its cropping pattern into high value export oriented crops. But there is a problem. If you want such high value export oriented crops, you cannot do it with the current system of predominance of small and marginal farms. You need some amount of economies of scale with respect to the size of the economic unit that we are talking about. That means that you need large farms. And how do you bring about the large farms? Two major methods were suggested to bring about these large farms. One was corporate farming, where a private company would come and the private company would actually either buy up or lease in large tracts of land, 400, 500 acres of land in a particular region from small and marginal farmers, and would cultivate a high value crop based on modern methods of cultivation, and from there it would export it or do whatever it wants. It will have a processing line of its own, whatever the company finds profitable or commercial, it should be allowed to do. And this kind of coming in of corporate farming, where corporates directly invest and do cultivation using modern methods, was suggested as one way of bringing about the diversification of cropping pattern in a successful way. But there was a problem that each state had a land reform law, which meant that ceilings were specified as to how much land could be owned or possessed in many states. And these land ceiling laws were an impediment to private companies coming in and taking over large tracts of land. So the argument was put forward that land reform laws in states should be amended and ceiling provisions should be diluted, allowing private players to own or possess large amounts of land. That was one suggestion, and many states like Gujarat and Karnataka actually did it also in one way or the other. Contract farming was another method suggested. It is different from corporate farming, often confused, but they are very different. In contract farming, the company does not come in and take a part directly in cultivation. Instead, it is a farmer who owns and cultivates the land, but the company comes and signs a contract with the farmer for the supply of a predetermined crop, of a predetermined grade, of a predetermined quantity, at a predetermined price from the farmer at a particular time. So the farmer by the sowing season itself will know that he signed a contract and he has to give 100 kg or 200 kg or 300 kg of a particular grade of a particular commodity to the company, and the company would pay a predetermined price, which is already specified in the contract to the farmer. So this can also take care of the problem of diversification. But again, here is where the constraint of APMC acts come in. APMC acts are a constraint because each APMC act in rural areas of states, they have a notified area specified for them. And each notified area for each APMC market, sometimes a set of tehsils, sometimes a district itself, sometimes even smaller a region. These notified areas, if anyone wants to come in and establish a private market or a yard in this area, it should get the approval of the APMC, because that notified area comes under the jurisdiction of the APMC committee, market committee. And also, if any transaction takes place, an ad valorem tax should also be paid to the APMC mandi, just as that tax is charged within the APMC mandi transactions. If you have an outside market, that tax should be paid in the APMC mandi also. So it was argued that this actually disincentivizes the coming in of private investment. And if private investment comes in, the farmer will have much more freedom to sell his or her product. And for this purpose, APMC Act should be amended in states to allow for such kind of free trade to come in and flourish. So this was the reason why APMC Act amendment is put forward as a recommendation. So as time passed, by 2003, the central government took a step forward and put out a model act on APMC amendments and gave it to the states and asked them to pass it in the state at the state level. Some states passed a part of it, some states passed some other part of it, but no state passed any of these acts in total. Then in 2017 and 18, the 2003 Act was split into two. One, a separate act for APMC reform, and another act separately for contract farming. And these two model acts were again given to the states. And this time the Finance Commission came in and said, if you want grants from us for specific purposes related to agriculture, agricultural marketing infrastructure, and so on, you should basically pass these model acts in your state assemblies. But again, very few states did what the center had demanded. So the status quo continued. And that is how in May 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, as part of the Atmanirbhar package of the government comes in and puts out three ordinances. And in these three ordinances, one was the APMC ordinance, the second was the contract farming ordinance, and the third was the essential commodities ordinance. And that essential commodities ordinance meant in the Essential Commodities Act of 1955, there were stock limits set for traders. And these stock limits were actually, it was argued that these stock limits disincentivized large investors in the private sector to come in and invest in storage, warehousing, etc. So if you want private investment to come into these sectors, you need to liberalize this sector. You need to basically take away these stock limits, which would mean that private players will come and invest in storage and warehousing. This is the point. So, and finally, in September 2020, these were passed as acts of the parliament. So this is the context that we are talking about. And this context was important because these arguments were squarely a part of the larger liberalization agenda argued out for the Indian agricultural economy after 1991. Now, the first act, the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act, more aptly called as the APMC Bypass Act by the movements. And this act basically the government said that this bill, and now it's an act, creates an environment where farmers and traders will have the ability of free choice of sale and purchase of agricultural products, which would also eliminate barriers to interstate trade and intrastate trade and commerce outside physical market premises, which are otherwise regulated by the mandis. And they also provide additional trading opportunities outside the APMC mandi so that farmers could also get competitive prices, which result from better or additional competition in the agricultural market. The second, the contract farming ordinance, as a name like this, the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. Here, this is an act, according to the government, which will ultimately regulate the practice of contract farming in India. So according to the government, this act empowers farmers to engage with processors, wholesalers, aggregators, large retailers and exporters on a level playing field without any fear of exploitation. It would transfer the risk of market unpredictability from the farmer to the company or the sponsor, and would also enable the farmer to access modern technology and inputs which can come as part of the agreements that are signed between the farmer and the sponsor. And this would actually reduce the costs that exist in marketing, and it will also improve farmers' incomes. And the third, Essential Commodities Act, I've already mentioned. Basically, they are removed from the list, such the commodities of cereals, pulses, oil seeds, edible oils, onion, and potato. They are all removed from the list of essential commodities, and this and they can be regulated with stock limits only in cases of war, famine, extraordinary price fluctuations, or natural calamities, which are very rare, of course. Otherwise, there would be no stock limit applied to traders. And in the case of agricultural processors and exporters, even when catastrophic conditions come, these stock limits and the regulation would not apply. Even when catastrophic conditions come, it would only be for traders that this would apply. But this is the larger point that was made by the government. So the first point that I would like to state with respect to the acts now that I've explained and described these acts and the claims and arguments as much as I could, as clearly as I could, we shall now come into an examination of what are the different issues that come up when we talk about these acts. The first is these acts, in my view, are very poor in terms of their constitutional validity. The point that I would like to say is that these acts violate the federal principles of the Constitution. Why is it so? In the Indian Constitution, what is there in the central list or the union list or the list 1 is entry 42, interstate trade and commerce. Okay, and rest, which is intrastate, is actually left to the states. So if you see the state list, entry 14 in the state list refers to agriculture. So everything related to agriculture here inside the state is falling under the legislative domain of the state governments. That's not alone. If you come to entry 26 in the state list, it says trade and commerce within the state. Entry 27 says production, supply and distribution of goods, and entry 28 says markets and fairs, right? But then how did the central government introduce this legislation? What has happened is that entry 26 and 27, okay, entry 26 and entry 27, both of these are actually subject to entry 33 in the concurrent list of the Constitution, list 3, which says that trade and commerce in the distribution, production, supply and distribution of foodstuffs, cattle fodder, raw cotton, raw jute, etc. All these, the entry 26 and 27 are actually subject to entry 33 in the concurrent list. Now, this is the loophole in the Constitution, which is not there in the original Constitution, which was actually introduced as the third amendment of the Constitution in 1954. This has been used by the central government to push these 3 farm acts. Now, there are 2-3 issues that come here. The first is that first issue that comes up is entry 28, which is referring to markets and fairs. This is not subject to entry 33 in the concurrent list. And we are squarely talking about markets here, APMC market. So there is no way in which the central government can pass a legislation upon the APMC Act, number 1. Number 2 is that if you look at the loophole that the central government has used with respect to pushing these legislations, different Supreme Court judgments at different points of time have gone into this issue. What happens if the center and state legislate on the same subject? This is a question that came up before the Constitution bench in the ITC versus Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee and others case of 2002. And the Constitution bench ruled with a majority at that time that, for example, ITC was purchasing tobacco from farmers in Bihar, and Bihar APMC mandis asked ITC for a market tax, for a mandi tax. ITC refused, saying that the Indian Tobacco Act of 1975 puts tobacco industry squarely in the central list, and you have no business to interfere. This case went into the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court ruled that ITC should pay a market tax to the Bihar APMC markets, primarily because agriculture is a state subject, and it basically, if center and state both enact a law, it should be the state act that prevails and not the central act, because the case being the case that we are referring to happens under the sphere of agriculture, which according to entry 14 is very much a part of the state list. If it is in the concurrent list, you can say that central act will prevail. But if it is in the state list, you cannot say that the central act will prevail. That is the point that the Supreme Court said in 2002. And this has enormous implications for what we are discussing. And this is the basis on which I am trying to say that these have poor legal validity. They have constitutional issues, and some people have even approached the Supreme Court to question the constitutionality of these amendments. And that's why I think this is a violation of federal principles of the Constitution. That's one part of it. Now let us get into the acts per se, and I shall do so by examining some of the claims that the government has put forward to sell the acts to the public. You would have seen a lot of ads and so on in the newspapers. So first, does the act provide more freedom to farmers to sell their produce outside the APMC mandis? That is what the argument is. APMCs are monopolistic, and this monopsony needs to be broken, and thus more freedom to sell for the farmer can be given by allowing private markets to come outside. Now, the first point that I would like to make here is de facto, this freedom is already present for the Indian farmers. Right? If you look at NSS data, the situation assessment survey that is conducted by NSSO, you will see that in the case of paddy, only 29% of the produce of the farmers entered a mandi. The rest entered private traders, input dealers, etc. Right? In wheat, only 44% of the produce in India was sold to a mandi. The rest was sold to private traders, input dealers, etc. In maize, only 39% of the product entered a mandi. And in soybean also, it was higher, but only still up to 59% entered a mandi. In other words, only a small part of the commodities that we are talking about actually enters a mandi. That is a farmer selling directly to the mandi. That happens in only a small number of cases, or only a small proportion of the cases. The largest proportion of sales happens already outside the mandi and not in the mandi. Right? And the farmer largely sells to a village trader, which is the largest kind of transaction that we see. Why is this? The reason is very clearly there aren't enough mandis in India. Right? In the 1960s and 70s, there were about 4,000 plus mandis in India. And this has increased to about 6,800 mandis today. But this is hardly sufficient in India to allow easy access to farmers, easy access for farmers to a mandi. The idea that was put forward by the National Commission on Agriculture in 1976 was that a farmer should be from his village able to reach a mandi by bullock cart in 1 hour. Okay, so 80 kilometers square was found as the appropriate area in which there should be at least one mandi. But currently we have one mandi only per 460 or 465 kilometers square. That is a situation. So a farmer takes more time to reach. Now we don't use bullock carts anymore. So we have motorized vehicles and so on, which will reach faster now. So based on a new kind of calculation and a method, the Doubling Farmers Income Committee of this government in 2016 came out with a report which said we need at least 10,188 markets in India, or mandis in India. That still means about 3,500 to 4,000 mandis more we need. So there aren't enough mandis in India. That is the point. That's one reason why farmers sell outside the mandi to village traders. But more important than that is the fact that small and marginal farmers, who are more predominant in India, they produce only very small quantities. And these very small quantities, you're not able to bear the transport costs to actually take these small quantities to a mandi and sell it, which is far away. The transport cost itself would be would make that unviable. As a result, the farmer prefers, the small and marginal farmers in particular, prefer to sell to a village trader in the village itself, which would save them transport costs. And this is another reason why they sell to a village trader and not to a mandi. Only large farmers or above a particular threshold of land size, they can afford the transport cost to take produce to a mandi. So this is one important problem. The other important problem, which sort of creates this issue with this phenomenon of more and more people selling outside the mandi and not in the mandi. So these data very clearly tell us that there is no monopolistic power you have for APMCs in India for most crops that we are saying. But in some states like Punjab and Haryana, these numbers are more. Right? In Punjab, actually, up to 90% is sold to a mandi. But that's because they have high density of mandis. A lot of procurement happens there at MSP and so on. So density is very high, and sale at MSP is also very high in states like Punjab and Haryana. Otherwise, outside these states of Punjab, Haryana, and so on, there is no monopoly power that the APMCs have. It is actually a myth created by government and its spokespersons. That's the first point. That freedom to sell de facto already exists. But de jure too, if you see, that freedom is already present in many states. 18 states have already amended their APMC acts to allow for the establishment of private market yards managed by a person other than the APMC. 19 states have amended their APMC acts to allow for the direct purchase of agricultural produce from farmers. 13 states have amended their APMC acts to establish farmers or consumers markets managed by people other than APMC. So a lot of these have actually happened already, but there is very little private investment that has flown into the sector. The number of private markets that have been established are just handful or a little more than that, and not any substantive number to celebrate about. This is the situation that we see. Take, for example, Bihar, which annulled its APMC Act in 2006. Basically, what you saw in Bihar was all APMC mandis shut down, and you moved from a regulated market system to a completely unregulated market system. farmers lost access to MSP. If the MSP is 1,900, the farmers in Bihar get only about 1,300 per quintal. So this kind of breakdown of APMC mandis and the absence of any private mandis that replace them is actually something that you see in most states. In Maharashtra, there has been delisting of fruits and vegetables from the APMC mandis after 2016. Still, some markets have come, but not many have come. Example of Kerala. Look at, for example, Kerala's when Coffee Board withdrew from coffee procurement in 1998. Did any private market come and replace these the channels of the Coffee Board? Hardly. Unregulated traders have taken over the sector. So basically, what we have seen is in some states, some farmers markets established by the government or facilitated by the government have come into being. Raitu Bazaar in AP and Telangana, Raitar Sandai in Karnataka, Apni Mandi in Haryana and Punjab, Shetkari Bazaar in Maharashtra, Udavar Sandaigal in Tamil Nadu, Krishak Bazaar in Odisha. All these are examples of government facilitated markets, not exactly private markets by corporates and so on. These have come, and these are largely because many states are now allowing these kinds of markets to come into their rural areas, and that has been there. But other than that, no private player has come and invested substantially in private markets, and that is what brings us to the second point: will farmers get a better price? And here is where we have to ask this question. The government is saying that, look, there is a lot of tax that the mandis charge today. If all those taxes actually disappear, you can ensure that in a private market with no such mandi taxes, you can ensure that all these mandi taxes that are saved can accrue as a higher price to the producer or the farmer. And hence the abolition of mandi taxes, the abolition of mandi taxes in private markets can be greatly beneficial, and hence the farm acts are required. That is the point that the government makes. So the question that we need to ask is, will mandi taxes be replaced by something else or not? I think yes, because if you look at a private player going and selling or purchasing or procuring commodities from the farmer. And here I'm in this picture, I'm giving a simple example of how Reliance Fresh does it. So farmers basically give commodities to a collection center that is established by Reliance Fresh in villages. And from this collection center, the commodities directly goes to a Reliance Fresh showroom in the city. That's one way in which it happens. So farmer to collection center to Reliance Fresh outlet. That's what they say. So as a result, what happens is the farmer will have to take the commodity to the collection center using his own transport costs. And from the collection center, the collection center will take commodities from thousands of farmers coming from different parts in that region. And this means that the collection center will face high amount of transaction costs, high levels of transaction costs in procuring each and every product from farmers, single farmers who bring a small amount of produce, whose produce now has to be graded. Each of them has to be given a price separately. These products have to be stored, put it into a transport network, transport to the nearest city, and then there'll be loading and unloading costs here. There'll be loading and unloading costs here, and then at the Reliance Fresh outlet level, Reliance always allows for a 30% loss due to perishability, right? So ultimately, you can count only on 70% of the commodities that reach the Reliance Fresh outlet. So that also has to be factored into your cost. So this means that the collection costs, storage costs, transport costs, loading costs, unloading costs, then perishability costs, etc., would mean that the transaction costs of the Reliance Fresh model are very high. And these transaction costs being very high means that there is hardly any incentive for companies like Reliance Fresh to actually go to a rural area, open a collection center, and purchase it directly from the farmers. They do it in very limited number of places where they have the capacity to do so, where the rural area is close to an urban location and so on. They do it there, but not otherwise. They have closed a large number of showrooms in remoter areas. Instead, what Reliance Fresh nowadays does is they rely on the APMC to get their supplies. So the farmer continues to sell to the commission agent and the APMC market, and from commission agent and APMC it goes to the trader, and from the trader it goes to the Reliance Fresh showroom. This is the preferred network for Reliance Fresh nowadays, and not this, because they find this to be very expensive with high transaction costs. And that is one reason why you cannot expect that the mandi taxes the abolition of the mandi taxes would mean the absence of no costs. Private transaction costs of Reliance are likely to take over these mandi taxes, and in many cases the private transaction costs are likely to be higher than the mandi taxes, in which case you will see that the price that the farmer receives will actually be lower than when mandis existed than without the mandis. So this is one important fear that the farmers have already expressed. And the current evidence also, if you see, you will see that in existing private markets also farmers are not actually getting any higher price compared to the mandis. They get a price which is largely comparable to the mandis itself. That is another important point to be mentioned. Another important point that a lot of people mention is that mandi taxes are portrayed as something like a villain of the piece. These are wasteful expenditures. Some people call it rent seeking and so on. Now, we need to understand what mandi taxes are used for. Mandi taxes are largely used by mandis or markets to bolster their own infrastructure in terms of storage, collateral management, grading facilities, etc. So a lot of the infrastructure creation by mandis is financed by these mandi taxes. It's not that somebody is stealing away this cash and going away. That's one. Number two, in states like Punjab, much of these revenues from not just from the market development fee, but also the rural development fee, it accrues to the Punjab Mandi Board, which is in charge of the construction and maintenance of rural road network in Punjab. Running of this money also goes to financing veterinary hospitals, providing sanitation, drinking water, construction of toilets in rural areas, etc. So a lot of rural infrastructure creation, which are directly beneficial to the rural communities, that is financed through these mandi taxes. And the fear expressed is that if mandi taxes go away, Punjab will have to introduce a huge user tax on roads and tolls to finance the construction and maintenance of roads, which was earlier financed by mandi taxes. So the question is here. If the mandis are weakened and private markets actually come, which we said is unlikely to come, but if they come, the farmer fears that the stable price on the connection to MSPs, which the mandi prices always have, that connection would be severed in the prices set in the private markets, which will have no commitment to the support price systems and so on. As a result, private market prices are likely to be lower than the price fixed by factoring in the MSPs as in the mandis. So they fear that they will lose access to remunerative prices if mandis are weakened and private markets come. And if mandis are weakened and private markets do not come, what will happen is a Bihar-like situation. That is, regulated markets will be replaced by unregulated markets. Both are imperfect, no doubt. But as Barbara Harris White once said, regulated imperfect markets are always better than unregulated imperfect markets. In fact, the former is less imperfect compared to unregulated imperfect markets. So this is the most important fear that the farmers have at this point of time. Then comes the question of whether middlemen will be eliminated. Now, the question is, of course, the middlemen can theoretically be eliminated, but in practice, unlikely, because there still remains the question as to there are large number of small and marginal farmers, and who is going to aggregate their produce. Somebody has to do that dirty job, right? Private large firms currently are not coming into this business because APMCs are doing the dirty job of aggregating the product at one level. Right? At one level, the farmers' products are procured by the village trader, who does the first round of aggregation. From there, it goes to the mandi. There is a second round of aggregation, and from there, Reliance Fresh can go and get a large amount of vegetables or fruits in one go. But if APMC mandis go, who will do that aggregation? Somebody will have to do. And if Reliance Fresh is going to do it, then it will need to outsource that business to some trader or some trading agency, which will actually do it, which will be the new middleman in place of the private trader or the commission agent in the mandi. So it's not that middlemen will be eliminated as long as there are geographical differences in the production of commodities that we have. It is unlikely that middlemen can actually be eliminated at all. There will be a new middleman in the place of an old middleman. That is likely to be the case. And I wanted to show you this picture, but I'm going to skip this. This is the proliferation of costs that exist, and you have the farmer here, you have the commission agent here, the wholesaler here, the retailer here, and the consumer here. And however you look at it, there is a multitude of costs that exist, and these costs would remain. Many of these costs would actually remain even when private markets come. That's the point I wanted to make. Because of shortage of time, I will not get into this in greater detail. I probably have about 5 to 7 minutes remaining. So the point is middlemen are unlikely to be eliminated. But there is a possibility, which is that farmers can get together, form a farmer producer organization like a cooperative or a farmer producer company, which will mean that they themselves will aggregate the produce and they will have a better bargaining power when he or she approaches the market. And that will also reduce the transaction cost. Now, these without somebody doing this aggregation, like for example FPO or the existing trader or the existing commission agent in the mandi, the private markets won't come. So the government recognizes this problem, and that is why it has said that we will establish 10,000 new FPOs in India. And it knows that only with the coming of these FPOs can aggregation happen quickly. But we do not have a large or widespread presence of FPOs in India. There are very few, but large numbers are failures. Many of them are not viable. Many of them have shut down. Turnover is very high. And this is a huge problem with respect to FPOs. It is not a successful enterprise in many places. Only in some pockets you have successful FPOs. So in the absence of them, who will aggregate? That's a question. So you will ultimately need a middleman. Now, the other question that arises in relation to this is, will MSPs remain if mandis go? If mandis go, there will be no regard for the MSPs in the price fixation in the private markets. No doubt about it. That's one. But the farmers have three other fears in this regard. One is MSPs are simply not rising nowadays. MSPs have used to rise at 8%, 9%, 10% per annum in the earlier periods. But after 2014, with the coming in of the current government, there is this fear that MSPs have risen at much lower rates of growth compared to previous years. And that's because MSPs are feared to lead to inflation and so on. So the government is not allowing a rise of MSPs as much as the earlier governments used to do. That's number one. Number two is MSPs are not adequate also. They do not cover the cost of production in many states, in many crops. MSPs, according to the Swaminathan Commission formula, it should have been fixed at C2 plus 50%, which is a comprehensive cost plus 50%. But currently the government does not fix it at C2 plus 50%. It gives a 50% premium over a much lower cost of production, which is A2 plus family labor. And that's a lower cost of production. Hence, as a result, farmers lose about 300 to 400 rupees per quintal in many crops in many states as MSPs not received. If MSPs were fixed at higher levels, they would have gained that amount per quintal. The government also is thinking, and the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices has recommended this, thinking of ending open-ended procurement on the one hand, and also if any state is paying MSP at a rate higher than the MSP that the center has fixed by paying a bonus on top of the MSP, then those states will be penalized by completely stopping procurement in those states. Okay, so states should, so there's a penalty being paid if states are giving higher MSP than announced by the center. All this have instilled a lot of fear in farmers as to the very future of the MSP system itself, given that procurement will be dismantled and given that PDS is also being downscaled and so on. Will MSPs remain? The government says it will remain on paper, but will it have any value if mandis don't exist? That is a question that many farmers have been asking. Coming to the second, I'll quickly go through the second and third legislations in the next 4 or 5 minutes. The contract farming legislation. The contract farming legislation is useful in one sense because it provides better price discovery to the farmer. Better price discovery because the farmer knows what price he or she will get 3 or 4 months down the line at the time of the sowing season itself. That's a good thing about contract farming, and that's why many farmers prefer it as well. But there are some issues with respect to contract farming. That is, first is the breach of contracts by the company. The company signs a contract with the farmer and agrees to buy it at 10 rupees per kg during the harvest season. But during that harvest season, market price falls to 7 rupees per kg in the open market. And the company much prefers to breach the contract, go to the market and get it at 7 rupees per kg rather than incur a loss and buy it from the farmers at 10 rupees per kg. This means that farmer is left in the lurch and he suffers enormous financial losses. So how to prevent this? This happens worldwide. Companies breach contracts. Technically, the farmer can go to the court or some redressal forum, but the company's battery of lawyers and its legal prowess would mean that the case would be made out that the farmer violated the contract by not giving commodities at the given grade or standard as prescribed in the contract, and it is the farmer who actually violated the contract, and we were unable to buy because the farmer brought in a poor quality product. That's the usual argument given by companies. But what is there in the legislations that we have to ensure that there are very few breach of contracts? That's one question that the farmers are asking. The second is that in many cases, the kind of cropping patterns that are popularized as a result of contract farming, because the company decides the cropping pattern, this means that the local food security considerations are imperiled in many cases. So there will be large-scale shifts of cropping pattern out of food crops, it is feared, which would endanger food security in many regions or local areas. And there is nothing to prevent this slide also in the legislations. In many cases, sustainability concerns have arisen as to what kind of farming practices are prescribed in the contracts. Are they in line with the practices of sustainability in or the needs of sustainable farming in that region? That's also a question that is asked and in areas of Latin America and so on. This is a very big concern. Large-scale mechanization can come in, which can lead to displacement of labor and loss of employment for workers. So what kind of compensation can we think of for workers? In many cases, in order to cut costs, child labor is used on a large scale. So what is there to prevent such exploitative practices in contract farming? These are the questions that farmers are asking. So the point is, we need regulation of contract farming, yes, but we need good regulation of contract farming. Okay, but unfortunately, the amendments that we have is actually an inadequate or a bad regulation of contract farming, because, as many have pointed out, it is not a regulating legislation, it is a promotional legislation. It basically keeps the door open to private companies to come and do whatever contract farming they want to do, but does not regulate them adequately. So it's promotional, not regulatory. That is the complaint that farmers' organizations have been raising. There is no adequate grievance redressal mechanism. The very idea of going to courts is now not possible because it will be settled at the DM level or the subdivisional magistrate level, and which will act as a civil court, and the farmer cannot appeal it in a civil court and so on. In many cases, people have advocated that to disincentivize breach of contracts by the company, there should be a third-party signature in each contract by the government or the local government and so on. This also has not been considered in the legislation. In many countries like Thailand, for example, they have consciously moved away from individual contracts between farmers and companies to a group of contracts with a company. A group of farmers with a company, I'm sorry. So there will be group contracts between a group of farmers and a company. And that is what is consciously given promotion to. Though this current legislation in passing allows for that possibility, we need much more conscious promotion of those routes if you want to ensure that farmers' interests are kept supreme and are protected. That is also not there in the legislation. In many cases, Supreme Courts have ruled that farmer can also be considered as a consumer, as in the Consumer Disputes Redressal Forum under the Consumer Protection Act of 1986. That is also a possibility there. So farmer can be treated as a consumer. It will be easy for the farmer to approach that court. That facility is also not provided in the legislation. It is because of all these problems that the current legislation is being called as a bad, inadequate legislation, whereas we need a regulation which is good. So that's the problem with this legislation. Coming to the last amendment, bill or act that we are talking about, the Essential Commodities Act. Here the problem is the following. The argument of the government is that if you remove the stock limits from traders, then you can actually allow private investment to come in. You can incentivize private investors to come in and invest in storage and warehousing. And the existing Essential Commodities Act was disincentivizing big investors because you had stock limits of 300 tons, 400 tons, etc. So nobody would come and invest in 3,000 tons, 10,000 tons investment capacity in storage and warehousing. And that is why we need this amendment. That is the argument. So the question to ask is, if this is actually the reason why private investors are not coming into storage and warehousing, I do not believe that removing stock limits would by itself lead to a rise in private investment. The reason is that if you want private investment to come in, you need the presence of a large surplus of a single crop from a single region, like the United States. The next 100 acres would be one crop. The next 500 acres would be one crop. So you can procure and store commodities in big silos and so on, as you see in the United States. And that is possible if that kind of surplus is available, that too from the same regions. And that's what brings in incentives for private sector to come and invest in the sector. But in India, if you see, the surplus of agricultural produce is not concentrated like that. It is actually scattered, fragmented across space and across crops. Somebody would produce half an acre of cucumber here, half an acre of tomato there, half an acre of some other vegetable there. None of this adds to a substantial surplus, which will incentivize companies to come and invest in storage and warehousing. So it is this scattered and fragmented nature of the cropping pattern across space, which actually is the most important reason why private investment is not coming in. So we need some amount of homogeneity in the kind of surplus crop, as well as facilities for aggregation across small producers if this private investment has to come into storage and warehousing, which is not obtained in most parts of India. And that is completely ignored as a problem by this legislation. The government is attempting to promote schemes like one district, one crop, etc., to promote homogeneity of cropping patterns and FPOs and so on. But we know that these have not found any success beyond that point in most states. So basically, here again, we hit a stalemate. We hit a dead end as to you're saying that this reform or legislation will bring in private investment, but there is actually no evidence that this will actually happen. But instead, what will happen? This will happen. A few private corporate players, however, are getting ready on the sidelines to create a foothold in potential areas. And these most important of them being the Adani Logistics Limited. Private companies like Adani Group have actually enormously expanded their investment in storage and warehousing in the last few years. Is also because Adani owns a lot of ports in India, and they are trying to create logistics networks connecting their own ports with hinterlands and so on. So they're trying to create monopolies in this area. In 2018, for example, the Adani Logistics acquired a 40% stake in a company called Snowman Logistics Limited for about 300 crore. And this company is largely into cold chain logistics. And Snowman Logistics has about 30% of the capacity in integrated organized cold chain service providers in India. So Adani already has stake in a company with 30% capacity in cold chain, and it has its own capacity other than in Snowman. So it basically has enormous share in the market for cold chains in India at this point of time, and that is likely to grow. And this is what is instilling the fear in farmers and also among consumers, that if these large logistic companies are able to control trade, storage, etc., and because they have deep pockets, will they not set the prices from tomorrow? Will they not set what prices will the farmers get and what consumers should pay from tomorrow? And how will it lead? How will it affect inflation? Particularly because you have taken away stock limits, and the government will have no instrument to come and intervene in such matters. So this is the reason why a lot of people and farmers themselves have been arguing that the answer to our storage warehousing problem does not lie in private investment. It lies in investment by the government and also investment by the cooperative sector, by large groups of farmers and so on. You need decentralized public procurement systems in India in order to cover for the absence of storage and warehousing structures. But that is completely out of the agenda of the government, because they do not see public investment in storage and warehousing as an option at all. They see private investment by corporates as the only way out of this problem that we have in this sector. So this is why this amendment is also under a great amount of controversy. It's what I wanted to say in initial remarks to you all. I know I went a little ahead of my time, but I hope I was able to cover all the topics that these three farm acts entail. And my idea was to provide you with some kind of a layout of what do these acts try to do, and what are the major claims made by the government, and how do and what are the basic counter arguments against these claims by the government. The point being that I find a lot of genuineness in, I find a lot of credibility in the counter arguments to what the government is saying. I do not see the claims of the government as credible, and the fears of the farmer movements are actually a lot more credible in this regard. I'll stop there, and maybe I'll look forward to questions where we can get into more important issues. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. That was a really comprehensive, whatever assessment of what was happening. You gave a historical perspective as well, setting a context for what has happened in the past and what is happening now. That was really great. And I don't think we've heard such a coherent and comprehensive account of what is happening before. So I'll open the floor for questions. I request you to use the raise hand option if you have questions, and so that I can go in order to avoid any confusion and sort of, talking over each other. So please go ahead. Since you're waiting for people to ask questions, Ram, let me start off with a question of my own. There is an argument that is being made that this is really, a movement of large farmers. There are all of these. This is the rich peasantry that's coming together to oppose the acts, largely from Punjab, Haryana, etc. Beneficiary of a lot of state support. The large number of small and marginal farmers that you're talking about really are not participating. And of course, there is a lot of counter argument to this, but what is your perspective on this?
Well, I think that, there is no doubt about the fact that farmers in Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, etc., see this as a very proximate problem to their lives and their material lives. In a state where 90 to 95% of the product is actually procured through the MSP system and the procurement system and the mandis, and if you tomorrow think of weakening the mandis, there is likely to be much more anger than in other states where there is much lesser share of procurement happening. So that's a no-brainer that there would be the protest would be far more severe and acute in states like Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, we also have to understand that the reason why this movement already has a pan-Indian character is because MSP system and the Mandi system, even if we say that they directly and more predominantly benefit the large farmers, landlords, etc., they do also benefit the small and marginal farmers in a very important way by MSP by setting in some kind of an upward push on the market prices that are fixed. The mandis by providing the village, the small and marginal farmer, even when he sells to a trader in the village, that trader aggregates and goes and sells it in a mandi. So there is an indirect contact that even the small and marginal farmer has with a mandi. It is because of that stable market called mandi that the private trader himself is coming and procuring it from the farmer. That also will be lost if the mandi disappears. So the small and marginal farmer also has an indirect but strong relationship with the mandi system and the MSP system. And thus it is, and that is the reason why you have seen this emerging as a, may I say, I don't know if the word is correct, pan-peasant problem, and that in that sense it is correct. And there is even if it is true, and which it is, that this is led by small larger farmers, more prosperous farmers. This is also a matter that affects the livelihoods of large number of small and marginal farmers. That cannot be denied. In that sense, I do not think that this is actually an argument raised to make fun of the agitation. You know, these people are eating pizzas, they are foot massaging machines, and so on. There's a flurry of abusive and other kinds of memes around. So these are basically produced by one center in order to basically show this movement in a poor light. But that's not washing, as is very clear. So I don't think this argument that it is a large farmer-led struggle is fully correct. Even if that is true, there is no problem in that. Even if that is true, but number two is that it is also something that affects the small and marginal farmers substantially.
Shashank has a question and Rakesh has a question. So we go in that order. Shashank, please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, this is not Shashank. This is Hari. I'm joining in from Shashank's profile.
Okay. All right.
So, sir, my question to you is on the basis of the impact of the removal of ESMA Act upon food grains and pulses. So, do you think this would lead to an impact on public distribution systems that are already coming under threat from the community? What do you think would be the impact of these laws upon the policies of the government to offer more free grains, or come up with emergency measures for food security?
Okay, I think the real agenda of this government and the earlier government also, you could read Kaushik Basu's economic survey and also Arvind Subramaniam's economic survey, as also Krishnamurthy Subramaniam's economic survey, though there's a diminishing quality as we go by. But no, I won't say much. The point that has been made in most of these economic surveys has been that the government actually prefers a closure, I repeat, closure of fair price shops or ration shops. It would actually much prefer a cash transfer in lieu of the subsidy being given to the farmers, to the consumers, and allowing them to go to the market and purchase at the market price. So ultimately, the agenda of the policymakers that we are talking about is basically closure of PDS. And so the dismantling of the procurement system and the MSP system are well aligned with that larger objective. And hence, there is no surprise that all of them have gotten together in this argument against the agitation by farmers. They all would like to see the procurement system go. They all would like to see the MSP system being weakened. They all would like to see the PDS also closed and being replaced by a cash transfer system. And that is so. I don't see the future of PDS as bright if such policies continue.
Rakesh, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for talk, sir. So actually, I have the 3 points to make. I have the doubts regarding how the concept of Gramin huts will be changed with this act, because the Gramin huts also said the same, that they want to create the markets at the village level. And the second thing is, sir, the transparency in APMC. So the transparency in APMC and the implementation of MSP, how it will how we should improve this thing, because the main problem, the logic they give, that for the APMC, the monopolistic nature of APMC. So how we can make the transparent APMC, because there is a problem in APMC, because the 3 people like commission agent, APMC officials, and the traders have the take on the APMC, so that many farmers face the problems inside the APMC also. So like like excessive charges collected from the farmers. These are the small structural problems they face in the APMC. So how we can make the transparent APMC in this context? Your view.
You're muted, Ram.
Sorry, I was just trying to show him a slide, which I shall do so just in a while. Okay, your first question was with respect to Grameen Hearts, but I'll sort of expand that point a little bit. And I'll just show you a small picture, which is from the Doubling Farmers Income Committee of the government itself. Basically, this is where you will find the APMC currently. Okay, this is largely the APMC level. Now, basically what is happening is the government wants to establish, the committee has said that it should, the government should establish what are called as the PRAMs, that is primary agricultural rural agri markets. Okay, these should be the village level or local level aggregation centers from where things will move to the primary market, the secondary market, tertiary market, and exports consumers wherever you want to take it to. In other words, what the government is saying, or what the committee has said is, we need thousands of these PRAMs to be set up, which would be sub mandis in some sense. And that's not the word they use, but which will aggregate for the mandi. Such markets should be established. No doubt, this is a good step. And this, what you asked about Grameen Hearts, can also be a name given to PRAMs. It's just known by a different name. So in that sense, this is the more appropriate structure that many committees have suggested earlier as Hearts, now as PRAMs, and so on. But the point is, who will create them? Okay, you need large mandis, new mandis you need, but you also need smaller, what you call as Hearts, what the committee calls as PRAMs, or some others call as periodical markets in rural areas, and so on. Who will come and establish this? It has to be the government or some cooperative of the farmers. Who else will come and establish? Because the private, we have tried the private method. You have allowed Reliance Fresh to go and procure from different places for many years. In fact, for 15 to 16 years, we have given Reliance Fresh the freedom to go and collect, or Nature's Basket, or Spencer's, or Big Basket to go and collect from farmers. Why are they not going to the farmers? It is that wherever the farmers markets have been set up also, it is the government that has gone and set up Ulavar Sandai, Raitu Bazaar, all these are Sarkari markets in one way or the other, even if facilitated. No private player has come. So the point is, we need such markets, whatever name you give to it, Heart, periodic market, PRAM, whatever. The point is, the government has to come and establish it. That is the ultimate point. And these acts do not have that as an objective in front of them. That is the problem that I see. The second point you mentioned is also very important, which is APMC mandis have a lot of rigidities and other imperfections, which is true. Any market, if it exists for a long period of time, will develop problems of its own. And is there trader collusion in APMC markets? Of course, yes. Are transaction costs, are mandi taxes sometimes very high? Yes, they are. Can the role of commission agents be rationalized? Yes, they can be, and they should be. Right? Nobody anywhere has prevented or stood against any of these reform measures in states. Punjab had a mandi tax of 14% till 6 years back. That 14% has come down to 6 to 7% now. Punjab did it on its own. That is an APMC reform, right? So the point is, do you, for example, need unified licenses for traders, that one trader has a license in one market can trade in any market in India? Why not? Very good idea. Why do you want to universalize the linking of mandis with national e-trading platforms? Of course, yes, do that. Right now, nobody is against any of these things. Nobody is against reducing trader, weakening trader collusion. In fact, many farmers organizations have fought big agitations at the local levels against corrupt APMCs, against trader collusion in APMCs, to democratize APMC functionings. That is what is required. This act doesn't do anything of that sort. It basically throws the baby out with the bathwater. That is what it ultimately does, and not to give the baby a good bath. The baby needs a good bath badly.
Thank you.
We have two more questions, but before that, there's a question in the chat box, Ram. It says that some have compared the success of private players in milk procurement to the new legislation on agriculture products. Is that so? So if you can answer that, then we'll.
Yeah. So what happens in milk procurement Is it a private player which comes in? No, it is basically cooperatives that Korean one set up and which have grown all over India based on the Amul model, which have come as markets. Only in the last 5 years have Nestle and all come into the market and are procuring some products from the farmers. But the basic institutional setup was not private. It was cooperative, facilitated, aided, incentivized by the government. And that is the model. Amul model is a good model, but there's one problem here, which is that Amul model is suited for milk. Amul tried to do it for vegetables. It did not succeed a lot. NDDB model of vegetable markets is a success here and there, but it's not a big success in many ways. So we should not mechanically think of what worked in milk as something that would also work in every other commodity. So we should be a little careful about that. But nevertheless, the basic Amul model is a cooperative model, not a private model. And that's absolutely welcome as an initiative if governments invest in it.
We can go with Sneha and then Dipankar Banerjee. Yeah, Sneha.
Professor, I just wanted to ask you that when, like, what I make out of it is that the government is trying to come out of certain duties as a welfare state and allowing for more capitalist modes to play out. But when you were talking about liberalization in the 1990s, you were talking about how that required them to amend other acts, which were also made from a welfareist approach, like the Land Reforms Act, like that ceiling that was extended. So I wonder that when such that dilution happens, when such reform acts are amended and larger players buy out smaller players, like smaller marginal farmers, a lot of unemployment also generates, like because of loss of traditional livelihoods. I want to understand that what does a government, how does a government rationalize such moves in a country like India, where the population is extremely high, it's extremely dense as well, where these kind of losses really amplify into other social problems. So how does a government like rationalize it? Is there no opposition that they face at all?
Okay, let me give you the example of what demonetization did or what GST did. What those processes also did was killing small capital in a big way, killing small traders in a big way, allowing for big private players to come in, more formalization of the sector, enlarging the size of the enterprises, and making entry impossible without huge capital investments. So that became the problem, particularly with GST. Demonetization had a 1-year impact, but then GST. But in GST, you clearly saw this, that small traders going out and larger players coming. This is exactly, I think, the process that you see with the coming in of these new acts also. A lot of these small traders are actually likely to be going out of the market because they will find many of their old practices unviable, and that's where the demise of that small trader is exactly what these acts also envisage, and that's why farmer agitation is also supported, at least from the outside, by the trader community, and that's why one reason why it has that kind of this kind of a currency it has in terms of popular support across semi-urban and rural areas, and I think this propensity to concentrate areas in terms of size of the enterprise is an unpublicized but a very clear implicit objective of these legislations. Coming in of big players and the death of small players. That's the broad thing. That's a broad phenomenon that you're likely to see, no doubt. I agree with you there.
Ram, we have very little time left in the meeting. So, so Dipankar Banerjee, if you can just quickly ask your question, make it brief, please. Thank you. Is he there? Then we have Shashank, who has another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I come in or?
Oh, yes, please do.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
Shashank.
My question was absolutely related to just the preceding question. Many of the problems that you raised are related to economies of scale. Scale in production leads to problems of scale in aggregation, scale in transportation, so on. So you would expect a trend where small and marginalized farmers would actually disappear to make way for large-scale farming. This is the nature of production in just about everything, not just food. And so I don't, I see this as a global trend. I'm not sure it's a good trend, but it is a trend that takes advantages of scale and provides advantages to consumers and everybody else in that process. So without going into the pros and cons of these acts, this is a broader implication of what has to happen, it seems.
I know I completely agree with you. Those who know me closely know that I'm no romantic of the small. The point being that the small is many times inefficient. Also, let's not hide that fact. So we need economies of scale. We need to bring in the benefits of economies of scale to farmers. But the question is that to be achieved only through corporatization of the enterprise, or are there alternative methods of doing it? Trying cooperatives where possible, maybe other farm producer companies where possible, whereby you give more and more stake to the producer himself in the enterprise rather than alienate the enterprise completely to an external agent. And that way, what you can also ensure is some amount of reinvestment of the surplus into the enterprise rather than draining it out somewhere. So these are experiments that you need in different cases. There is no blanket solution to any place. We need economies of scale in production, trade, and marketing, and also that's very much essential to ensure the viability of value addition and processing sectors. And this creation of that value chain has to be carefully done. Instead of that, what we unfortunately see is a blind opening of the doors to the corporate sector and asking them to come in and do what they want. That is, I think, the problem. So economies of scale can be achieved in different ways. What is the way in a democratic way? What is the more democratic way of doing it is the question that we need to ask.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramakumar. I think we've run out of time, so we will close the meeting here. But I really want to thank you for an excellent talk and an excellent discussion as well. And I think maybe we should have another one on capitalism in agriculture and economies of scale sometime soon, because it's a huge discussion that is yet to be had. I mean, how do you achieve economies of scale without throwing the small and marginal farmer under the rail? So that's, I think, an important question. And what does it imply in a situation where labor absorption in other sectors? I mean, it's not as if we have an industrial sector that is booming, which can absorb freed up labor. So what do you do in such a situation is a serious question, I think, that we must all address. And the parallels of what's happening with in the context of liberalization in the agricultural sector with a lot of the other sectors that the government is opening up, I think, are very clear. So it was a really important discussion, and I thank you very much for your time. I know you have a very, very busy schedule. So thank you very much. And we look forward to having you at NIAS again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tejal. Thank you.
So we will close the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.